Welcome to Voices of Life, a place for stories, thoughts, and lessons inspired by everyday life. Take a moment to listen, reflect, and learn. Welcome.
My name is Kendra. I'm 27 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the reasonable one. The dependable daughter. The practical sister. The one who doesn't make a scene. So when my parents asked me to come sit down in the living room that evening, I already knew what role I'd be playing. Melissa was on the couch when I walked in, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone like this was just another ordinary Tuesday. She didn't look nervous. She looked comfortable. That should have been my first warning. Mom had that tight smile she uses when she's about to present something as generous, even if it isn't. Dad cleared his throat the way he does when he doesn't want to argue but has already picked a side. We've made a decision, Mom said, folding her hands neatly in her lap. We want to help both our daughters get a real start in life. Both our daughters. It sounded equal, fair, balanced. Melissa finally looked up from her phone. Dad explained that they'd decided to invest in our futures. Melissa would be getting a fully paid apartment downtown. Brand new building. Secure entry. Gym. Rooftop lounge. Walking distance to everything. Mom even said, it's perfect for her. Of course it was. Melissa smiled slowly, like she'd expected it all along. Then Mom turned to me. And for you, Kendra, we've decided to give you a house. A house. For half a second, my heart actually lifted. A house sounded bigger, more permanent, more grown up. Maybe, just maybe, this time things were even. Then Dad slid a folder across the coffee table. The address meant nothing to me. But the photos inside, they said everything. Peeling paint. Cracked windows boarded from the inside. A roof sagging like it had given up. Weeds swallowing the yard whole. It looked abandoned. Forgotten. Like something the city planned to tear down someday. Mom rushed to fill the silence. It has potential, she said quickly. And you're good with practical things. You're not high maintenance like your sister. Not high maintenance. I'd heard that before. It was how they translated, we expect less from you. Melissa's apartment would be fully furnished. Decorated. Move-in ready. My house. It just needs a little work, Dad said. A little work. The truth settled into my chest like a stone. Melissa was being handed comfort. I was being handed a project. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say it wasn't fair. That I worked just as hard. That I'd never once asked for less. But I'd spent 27 years swallowing my feelings to keep the peace. So I nodded. I said thank you. I signed the papers. The house was legally mine. No mortgage. No rent. Just mine. A week later, I stood inside it alone for the first time. The air smelled like dust and something damp. When it rained that night, water leaked through the ceiling and dripped into a bucket I found in the kitchen. The heater didn't turn on. The floorboards groaned under every step like they were protesting my existence. I sat on the bare living room floor and cried quietly where no one could see me. But the next morning, I went to work. I picked up extra shifts. I watched repair videos late at night. I borrowed tools from coworkers. I scraped, patched, cleaned, and tore out rotted wood with hands that blistered and bled. Every weekend, I chose that house. While Melissa posted photos from rooftop parties in her new apartment, I was hauling debris out to the curb. Slowly, painfully, something changed. The roof stopped leaking. The windows let sunlight in instead of drafts. The walls went from cracked and gray to clean and warm. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't modern. But it started to feel solid. Safe. Earned. For the first time in my life, something belonged to me because I fought for it. And just when I finally felt proud, when I finally stood in that living room and thought, I did this. That's when my parents called and said they wanted to come see the house. I had no idea that visit would end with my mother looking me in the eye and telling me I had 48 hours to move out. And I definitely didn't know that the piece of land beneath that broken down house was about to change everything. By the time my parents pulled into the driveway, the house didn't look abandoned anymore. The weeds were gone. The porch stood straight and steady. Fresh paint caught the late afternoon sun. You could actually see the front door now instead of squinting through neglect. I stood there waiting, hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from hope. Maybe this time they'd see me. Mom stepped out first. She froze halfway up the walkway. Her eyes moved slowly over the windows, the new roofline, the flower beds I'd planted along the edge. Dad followed behind her, silent as always, hands in his pockets. This looks different, Mom said carefully. Different. Not beautiful. Not, you did an amazing job. Just different. I opened the door and let them walk inside. The living room was bright now. Sunlight poured through the windows I'd replaced myself. The floors were sanded and sealed. The walls were warm cream instead of cracked gray. I had built a small sunroom off what used to be a collapsing porch. It wasn't big, but it was peaceful. Mine. Mom walked through slowly, her heels clicking against the floor I'd refinished by hand. She didn't touch anything. She didn't smile. She evaluated. Dad paused in the kitchen, running his fingers along the countertop I'd installed. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. For a moment, I thought maybe they were impressed. Then Mom spoke. We've been talking, she said, folding her arms. And we think it would make more sense for Melissa to live here. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? This house, she continued calmly, is much larger than her apartment. It's only fair. She needs more space. The words didn't register at first. I laughed softly, waiting for the joke. There wasn't one. Dad cleared his throat. You've done a nice job fixing it up. Really. But family assets should be balanced. Balanced. My stomach dropped. You gave this to me, I said quietly. It's legally mine. Mom waved her hand dismissively. Paperwork can be adjusted. We're your parents. That hurt more than I expected. Because she wasn't asking. She was telling. You'll have 48 hours to pack your things, she added, like she was giving me a generous notice. Melissa already started arranging movers. 48 hours. After a year of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. After choosing this place when no one else would. Dad still wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the worst part. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why Melissa always needed protecting while I was expected to survive anything. Instead, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Clarity. 2 days later, Melissa showed up with a rental truck and 3 of her friends. She walked up the driveway confidently, sunglasses perched on her head like she was arriving at a vacation home. I'm thinking the couch should go near the window, she said before she even stepped fully inside. Then she crossed the doorway. And stopped. Her smile faded. Her eyes darted around the room, at the floors, the walls, the sunlight pouring in. But it wasn't admiration. It was confusion. What is this? She asked slowly. Mom rushed in behind her. Isn't it beautiful? You're so lucky. Melissa shook her head. No, I mean, why does it feel like this isn't mine? That's when I smiled. Because she finally sensed what my parents never bothered to check. This wasn't just a renovated house. It wasn't just paint and flooring and fixtures. It was ownership. And ownership runs deeper than walls. Mom turned to me sharply. Why are you smiling? I walked calmly to the kitchen counter, the one I had installed with my own hands, and opened a drawer. Inside was a folder, neatly organized. Every document, every deed, every zoning certificate, every contract. Because while they were decorating Melissa's apartment, I was reading every line of the paperwork they handed me. I placed the folder on the counter between us. Silence filled the room. Dad stepped forward first, picking up the top document. His face changed almost immediately. Mom leaned over his shoulder, reading faster, her breath growing uneven. Melissa moved closer. What does that mean? She whispered. I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time without fear. It means, I said evenly, you can't take this house back. And that wasn't even the part they should have been worried about. Because the house was never the real prize. The land underneath it was. And none of them had any idea what it was actually worth. Not yet. You could hear the silence. Not the quiet kind. The heavy kind. The kind that presses against your ears and makes your heartbeat sound louder than it should. Dad kept flipping through the documents like if he read them twice, the words might rearrange themselves into something he preferred. They didn't. Mom's voice came out thin. What is this? It's the deed, I said calmly. And the zoning certification. And the development agreement. Melissa blinked. Development. I nodded. See, when they handed me the house a year ago, I didn't just glance at the papers and sign like they probably expected me to. I read them. Every line. Every clause. Every attached form. Because when you grow up being treated like the practical one, you learn to pay attention. The house itself had been written off as low-value residential property. Structurally compromised, outdated, in need of significant repair. Basically, a burden. That's why they were comfortable giving it to me. What they didn't bother noticing was the land classification. The property sat on the edge of a commercial expansion zone. It had been rezoned years ago, grandfathered into a mixed-use development corridor before surrounding parcels caught up. Translation: the house looked worthless. The land wasn't. About 3 months after moving in, I'd gotten a letter in the mail from a development company asking if I'd be willing to discuss future opportunities. At first, I thought it was junk. It wasn't. They didn't care about the cracked windows or the sagging porch. They cared about location, street access, lot width, zoning overlap. While Melissa was picking out throw pillows for her downtown apartment, I was sitting in a small office across town asking a real estate attorney what I actually owned. And what I owned wasn't a fixer-upper. It was leverage. Dad lowered the final page slowly. His hands were shaking now. You signed an agreement? He asked. A conditional one, I replied. Once the structure passed safety inspection and the lot met code requirements, the sale would finalize. Mom's face went pale. Sale. I held her gaze. It finalized last week. Melissa took a step back like I'd physically pushed her. How much? Mom whispered. I told her. The number didn't sound real even when I said it out loud. It was more than they paid for Melissa's apartment. More than they ever planned to spend on me. Dad sank into one of the dining chairs. That's not possible, he muttered. It is, I said gently. The funds are in escrow. Closing is in 2 weeks. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but not the kind I'd cried on this floor a year ago. This was supposed to be mine, she said shakily. You can't just sell it. I looked at her, really looked at her. It was never yours. Mom's composure cracked first. You did this on purpose, she snapped. You planned this. I almost laughed. You gave me something you thought was worthless, I said quietly. I just treated it like it wasn't. That's when the guilt tactics started. Mom offered to switch. Said I could have Melissa's apartment instead. Said we could redo paperwork and call the developer off. Dad tried the calm approach. We can figure something out. We're family. Family. The same word they used when they told me paperwork didn't matter. But here's the thing about being underestimated for years, it teaches you patience. It teaches you to move quietly. And it teaches you not to confuse love with control. I'm not angry, I told them. I'm just not giving this back. Melissa started crying harder now. I already told everyone I was moving in. That almost broke me. Not because I felt guilty. But because even now, she was embarrassed, not sorry. Mom turned desperate. Do you know what people will say? I nodded. They'll say you gave me a broken down house, I replied. And I turned it into something valuable. Nobody had a response to that. 2 weeks later, the developers came to finalize everything. Melissa's moving truck never unloaded. The boxes went back where they came from. My parents stopped calling after that. The day I handed over the keys, I stood alone in the living room one last time. I didn't feel revenge. I felt closure. Because that house was never a punishment. It was a test. And they never realized the real foundation wasn't the wood or the paint. It was the ground beneath it. But what happened after the money hit my account, that's the part no one expected. Not even me. The money hit my account on a quiet Thursday morning. No dramatic music. No celebration. Just a notification on my phone while I was sitting at work, staring at a spreadsheet. For a moment, I just looked at the number. It didn't feel real. A year ago, I had been sitting on the floor of that broken house with rainwater dripping into a bucket, wondering why I was never enough. Now I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined. And the strange part, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. The developers began demolition a week later. I drove by once. Just once. The sunroom I built was still standing that morning. The garden I planted was in bloom. For a second, I questioned whether I should have kept it. Whether I should have fought to live there longer. But then I remembered something important. It was never about the house. It was about what it represented. For the first time in my life, I hadn't accepted the role they assigned me. I didn't take scraps and call it gratitude. I didn't shrink to make someone else comfortable. I read the paperwork. I asked questions. I made decisions quietly. And when the time came, I stood my ground. I used part of the money to buy a home across town. Not flashy, not oversized, just peaceful. No one picked it out for me. No one compared it to anyone else's. No one told me what I should be grateful for. It was mine because I chose it. Mom tried calling about a month after the sale. I let it go to voicemail. Her message wasn't angry. It was careful. We just don't understand why you didn't talk to us first, she said. That part almost made me smile. Because I had spent my entire life talking, explaining, reasoning, trying to be understood. But they only listened when control slipped out of their hands. Dad never called. Melissa sent one text. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I am. And I meant it. Not because I had more money than her. Not because things balanced out. Life isn't a scoreboard. I was happy because I finally stopped measuring my worth by how fairly I was treated. Months later, I heard they sold Melissa's apartment. Financial strain, apparently. Investments didn't go as planned. Funny how quickly things shift. But here's the truth nobody talks about. This story isn't about revenge. It's about being underestimated. It's about what happens when someone hands you something broken, expecting you to fail, and you quietly build something powerful instead. They saw a rundown house. I saw possibility. They saw the practical daughter. I saw someone capable. And maybe the saddest part of all. If they had just believed in me from the beginning, I probably would have shared everything. I would have helped them. I would have included them. But when you spend years being treated like the backup plan, eventually you stop waiting to be chosen. You choose yourself. So if you've ever been given less, if you've ever been told to be grateful for something unfair, if you've ever watched someone else receive the polished version while you got the project, don't panic. Sometimes the blessing isn't obvious. Sometimes the real value is buried underneath what looks like a burden. And sometimes the very thing they tried to minimize becomes the foundation that changes your entire life. Because in the end, they didn't lose a house. They lost the version of me who would have kept accepting less. And that's something they can never take back.
If you've lived through a similar story, if your pain was silenced, ignored, or misunderstood, you're not alone. You can share your story with us directly by email. We read every message, and with your permission, we'll tell your story so others don't feel alone.